And so really appreciate you joining. We're going to get right to it today. We're going to cover 3 keys to recruiting more volunteers. And this is a great time to talk about this because where I am, and assume where you are, school just kind of started back, and it's kind of the second new year. It's the second new year for a lot of churches. And so we're going to talk about volunteers, 3 keys to recruiting more volunteers. My name is Michael Lukaszewski, and I am the CEO, the founder of Church Fuel. I have been a youth pastor. I've been a pastor. I've worked as a church consultant and now run Church Fuel full time. And so the most common question I get is how to say my name. So I want to put it up here for you phonetically. That's how to say my name, Michael Lukaszewski. And I always tell people it's a zoo, like where the animals are. And so that's how you say my name. I thought about changing it. My wife, when we got married about 15 years ago, her maiden name was Green. So she went from Green to Lukaszewski. And I thought about switching back, but I've got too much invested in this now, and I think my parents might be mad at me. But man, it is awesome to be with you today and hang out. There's a picture of me and my family. This picture was, I don't know, about 2 years old. We need to get some new ones taken. But that's my wife, Jenny. We've been married for about 15 years. We have 3 kids, live in Atlanta. My daughter right above my head is our oldest. She's 13, 8th grade. Her name is Lauren. And then Matthew is right next to me with his missing tooth that is now grown back in. And he is about to turn 9. He and I actually have the same birthday. And so we were born on the same day. Just a few years apart, and he loves playing football and baseball, and he's playing flag football right now, and loves it. So he comes home from school every day and wants to throw the football. And then Emma is our middle child. She loves animals and the outdoors, and I promised to take her hiking this weekend. So she wants to go hiking and look for wildlife, and I was like, well, we'll see some squirrels. And so anyway, that's the family right there. And so love the family, all of them, and love the opportunity to spend time with you guys today. This is me on Twitter. If you just hit me up on Twitter, mlukaszewski.com. I tweet a lot about personal development and leadership and whatnot. Of course, you can follow us at churchfuel.com. That's easier. That's the company. That's our business. But mlukaszewski, if you can manage to spell that and follow me on Twitter, I'd love to connect with you as well. When we moved to Atlanta, the thing that brought us to Atlanta back in 2005 is we moved here after about 10 or 12 years in student ministry to start a new church that was a portable church that met in a movie theater with just a small core team. When we moved to Atlanta, we didn't know anybody, literally didn't know anybody, and it took us about a year to get a small core team up of about 25 people, started a church that met in a movie theater, ended up buying and renovating this warehouse nightclub thing of a jigger, and I mean it was a learning experience. It was a good time. God did some amazing things. Church grew up to almost 1,000 people in the first couple years. It was crazy, and so I've seen the blessings and experienced the pain that comes from a growing church and from change, from all those things. After about 6 or 7 years there, I worked with a good friend of mine named Casey, who had started a company called Giving Rocket and got involved there, and it eventually became the Rocket Company. So I spent about 3 years there with the Rocket pastors with preaching and giving and systems and strategies. And so that was an awesome experience. And so learned a ton and got to meet a lot of great pastors, got to meet a lot of great church leaders, and really enjoyed it. Last year, my buddy Rob and I, who's on the other end of the technology on our webinar today, got everything set up. You probably got an email from Rob about today's event. Started an organization called Church Fuel, and so that's what I'm doing now. This is the main thing. This is the big deal, and it's where I'm putting my time and energy and efforts and resources in order to resource and equip pastors and church leaders. And so our mission at Church Fuel, kind of the reason we exist, is we want to provide insanely practical resources to move your church forward. And that's what we're about. That's what we're trying to do. That's what I wake up every day and think about is what can we create? How can we help? How can we serve? But not just in a theoretical way or not in a philosophical way, but what can we give a pastor? What can we give a church leader that is insanely practical, something they can use, not just to make their life easier, but to move their church forward, because we love the local church. Our number one core value is we love the church and we love pastors. And so we are so honored today that you would spend time with us on this training. Today, we'll talk about 3 keys to recruiting more volunteers. And as we dive into this, as we get going on this, we're going to talk about some practical ideas, insanely practical ideas that you can use to recruit more volunteers to serve in your church. And so whether you need more volunteers in the kids ministry, whether you need more greeters and ushers, we talk to pastors all the time. They're like, how do we recruit more small group leaders? How can we get more volunteers? Because we've got an important mission, we've got an important vision, but how do we get more volunteers? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And the way I want to get into this is I want to talk to you about the 80s. I grew up in the 80s. I remember the 80s. They're remaking all the 80s movies, and they're all terrible. But the other night we watched some 80s movies. We watched War Games. I don't know if you remember that movie. I actually think that might have even been the late 70s when War Games came out. But if you remember War Games, let me know. I mean, and Matthew Broderick was in it, the computer, took over and was like, "Shall we play a game?" And the computer was talking and War Games. It was a crazy movie. I didn't remember how much bad language was in that. And so I'm watching that with my kids, and I'm like, "Hey kids, that's a bad word. We don't say that." And then like a minute later, I'm like, "Hey kids, that's a bad word. We don't say that." They talk like that in the 80s. We don't talk like that now. But it was awesome. I love the 80s. But I remember going to the library in school to work on book reports. I don't know if y'all remember book reports, but the way you would do a book report is you would go to the library and look up an article in the encyclopedia and read everything there was to know. And the encyclopedia basically contained everything there is to know about all the subjects. And so you get the volume P, and look up plants, and that's all the stuff that you needed to know, and you'd write your book report from the Encyclopedia Britannica. And it was awesome. I mean, it was every year they came out with a new one, and they were very expensive, and so we had to go to the library to get them. Really, really rich people had a copy of the encyclopedia in their house. Well, then in the 1990s, Microsoft came out with Encarta, and right around the time they released Windows 95, I know some of you, the young folks on here, and I'm not that old. I'm just 41. Or 42, I can't even remember. But I remember when Windows 95 came out, I mean, it was lines around the Circuit City stores, the way that people lined up for like the iPhone when the iPhone first came out. And so when Microsoft released Windows 95, they put the entire encyclopedia on discs, on CDs, and you could get one CD or a couple CDs in a box and pop it in your computer, and you didn't have to have these big books, and it was way cheaper, and you could just type in something, and it had, they would say hundreds of multimedia articles. It had some pictures and some like really terrible videos that you could watch on different subjects. But Microsoft spent a ton of money on this. They hired all these PhDs, they hired all these professors, all these researchers, all these writers and editors to produce all these articles on CD. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of the Britannica. Well, then in the 2000s, another encyclopedia came out, and it's Wikipedia. In fact, if you Google just about anything, I mean, you just type in something, somewhere on that first page results is probably going to come up a Wikipedia article, because there are over 3 million, maybe even more than that right now, articles across all different kind of language, but 3 million articles on all kinds of subjects. And here's the deal about Wikipedia. This is what's so crazy, is when Wikipedia started, they didn't hire researchers, they didn't hire editors, they didn't hire writers and all these expensive people. In fact, Wikipedia was a nonprofit organization, just a very, very, very small staff. All the writers of Wikipedia, this, right, is everybody. Everybody can write or contribute to an article on Wikipedia. So there's no big staff, there's no PhDs, there's no editors. I mean, the community is what kind of creates the content at Wikipedia. And why am I telling you this whole story? This story is so important because this is a really important principle, just this kind of 20, 25-year history of the encyclopedia, moving from Britannica and books to kind of putting it in digital format to then decentralizing it and letting everybody be an author. The big principle is this. You know this to be true in your church, is that everybody's better than somebody. And what this means is that if you're the pastor, if you're the children's pastor, if you're the youth pastor, you can't do all the pastoring, children's pastoring and youth pastoring. You just small group of experts, one pastor, a small group of superheroes can't do all the ministry that needs to be done in a church. If you're going to succeed as a church, as a ministry, as a mission, then you're going to need volunteers. But the powerful, powerful thing is that when everybody comes together for a purpose, when everybody joins together, everybody is better than somebody. And so you're not going to be able to hire your way out of your growth problem. You're not going to be able to go, if we could just get the one superstar youth pastor, it'll solve all the problems. No, you're going to need to involve everybody in your church. Now, 80s and 90s history is awesome, but the Bible is eternal. So what does the Bible say about this? Here's what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. He says, now you, and he's talking to Christians, okay? He's talking to Christians who lived in the city of Corinth. He says, now you are the body of Christ. And so he introduces this imagery that the church is a body, and you are the body of Christ, not a building person, right? So you are the body of Christ. And each one of you, so it's a group of people now hearing this or reading this, and each one of you is a part of it. So you are a part of the body of Christ, but your attenders and your members and the people who serve and the people who sit and all the people who are part of the church, if they're a Christian, they're a part of the body of Christ. And it's a really, really important thing. It's a really, really important principle because, as you know, the church is not a building, it's a people. But all the people in the church have a part to play. We are all part of the body of Christ. And that's what the Bible has to say about the church, that all the people are part of the body. And then he goes on, he writes this to another group of people, Christians who live at Ephesus. And in this case, he's talking about pastors. And he says the job of a church leader is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And then he brings back this body language again, for building of Christ. So he says your job as a pastor, a pastor who may be watching a webinar, a pastor who says, we want to the church, a pastor who, kind of wants to lead some things. Your job as a pastor is to equip the people in the body, the saints in the body, to do the work of the ministry. So your job's not to do the work of the ministry. Your job's to equip people to do the work of the ministry. And then the result is that the body's built up. So I think growth is a result of us doing the things that God has called us to do. Growth is a result of when we are doing what we are supposed to do. And so as we talk about involving people in the work of the ministry, this is not about just good leadership or church growth. This is about discipleship. Getting volunteers, recruiting volunteers, putting them in the places that you need to serve this fall in kids ministry, and guest services, and production, and groups, putting people and placing people and developing them and training them and unleashing them to do the work of the ministry is not just a good way to grow a church. It's not just good leadership. It's actually part of the discipleship process. I believe that volunteerism and recruiting volunteers is one of the keys to healthy church growth. In fact, I think it's one of those leading indicators that as you move the needle on recruiting and putting volunteers into place, you can move the needle on giving and on groups and on inviting and other things. It's one of those leading indicators. The more people you can involve in ministry opportunities in your church, the healthier your church will be. And as a result, I believe your church can grow that way. Wayne Cordeiro is a pastor in Hawaii, and I'd love to be a pastor in Hawaii. He wrote a great book called Doing Church as a Team. And he said this. He says, I'm convinced the influence of a church has on its community will be determined in large part not by the personality of the pastor, the size of the building, or how long the ministry's worked in the community. It will be determined instead by the percentage of involvement in the ministry of each member. Now, look at this quote. This is so powerful, and I think Pastor Wayne is right on this. He said, listen, if your church wants to be influential in your community, and not influential for selfish reasons, but for good reasons, if your church wants to be influential, it's not about the personality of pastor, and that's good news, right? Because the church is not built on us, it's on Jesus. So your influence is not determined by your personality, but it's also not determined by the size of your building or how long you've been in the community, whether you're brand new or you've been there forever. Instead, he says, influential churches get a lot of people involved in the ministry. In other words, the body, all the parts of the body are working together, and that's what grows up the church. So what we're going to talk about today is one step. We teach a three-part system for volunteers. And at Churchfield, we teach three parts. We teach recruiting, training, and pastoring. And what I want to talk to you today is about just the first part of that. We want to talk about recruiting. Now, this is not going to be everything about volunteer ministry, because once you recruit people, you still need to train them and you still need to pastor them. But that'd be too much for today. And in our little amount of time we have, I want to talk to you about just recruiting. We're just going to focus on step one of the system, recruiting. And this is a question that how do we recruit more volunteers? And what's interesting about this is small churches and big churches, they're still asking this question. Whether your church has 50 people in it or 500 people in it, I've never had a church say, Michael, we've got way too many volunteers. Can you help us come up with more ministries? No, the question is always the reverse. We've got some ministry and we need more volunteers. So whether you're small or big or in the middle, whether you're a rural church or a city church, no matter what kind of church, denomination, non-denomination, this is a common question. How do we recruit more volunteers? So I want to give you 3 keys to recruiting more volunteers. And the first key is this. If you're taking notes, you can write this down. The first key is this. Choose an approach. You have to choose an approach. If you want to recruit more volunteers, you've got to choose the way you want to solve this problem. Now, I'm going to tell you 2 of the most common approaches that we see, and I'm going to unpack them for you. And as we go through this, I want you to think which approach is going to work best in your church. Okay, step number 1 is choose an approach. Now, there's 2 main approaches, and I want to just walk you through both of them. All right, so the first approach we call the shoulder approach. And so it's shoulders. So approach number 1 is shoulders. And here's what I mean. Have you heard the phrase tapping shoulders or rubbing shoulders? You know, sometimes you may go into a thing, it's like, hey, do we just want to rub shoulders with people? That's a really weird metaphor, I think, for like connecting people, right? Rubbing shoulders. I think if you rub shoulders with me, I'm like, step off, right? Step away. I don't know that we want to physically rub shoulders, but what we want to do is we want to metaphorically rub shoulders. And here's how this approach works. The shoulder approach happens when your existing volunteers, so whether you have 1 volunteer or 100 volunteers or somewhere in the middle, the shoulder approach happens when your existing volunteers are recruiters out in the church. Okay, so you've got an existing volunteer base, and you go to that existing volunteer base and you say, your job is not just to do the work of the ministry, but as you're doing the work of the ministry, you need to have your eyes open. You need to rub shoulders. You need to tap shoulders. And you need to be on the lookout to find somebody to do this with you. So it works like this. If you've got 10 volunteers, and you go to those 10 volunteers and say, here's the deal. Guys, in the next 6 months, your mission, should you choose to accept it, all right, your mission is to find somebody to do your job with you. Now, it may take you months, but you're going to go from 10 volunteers to 20 volunteers if everybody finds 1 more person to do their job with them. Now, the benefit of this approach, and one reason I love it, is because it's decentralized. This approach does not depend on the pastor preaching the best sermon in the universe on volunteering. This approach does not depend on a staff person who's just wired up to recruit people and can recruit like nobody's business. It doesn't depend on that superhero recruiter to go recruit volunteers for the whole church. This approach doesn't depend on a nominating committee to nominate a bunch of people for jobs that they really didn't want to do in the first place. This approach decentralizes volunteerism in your church, and it puts the responsibility on the people who are already volunteering. Now, in many ways, there's nobody better to recruit volunteers than the people who are already volunteering. You're just trying to photocopy them. You're just trying to duplicate and replicate what they're doing. And so the benefit here is that it's decentralized. It can happen all year long. It can happen all the time. Imagine all year long is your small group leaders and your kids ministry workers and your student ministry workers are not just working in those ministries, but they've got their eyes open. They've got their ears open. And you've trained them to be intentional to recruit somebody to do their job with them. Now, I want to give you some pointers on how to do this because this sounds great, but it's hard to do. Like, all right, well, no kidding. If we could get everybody to replicate themselves, that'd be awesome. But how do we do it? All right, let me give you some pointers. First of all, if you're going to do this approach, you got to put recruiting at the top of the job description. What job description am I talking about? I'm talking about your volunteers. They need to have a job description. And one of the things that we give people, one of our resources that we have are volunteer job descriptions. We've created 5 really good job descriptions that we can customize. And every single volunteer in your church needs to have a job description that says what hours it takes, and here's how I call if I've got a problem. Some of the reasons that volunteers always text on Sunday morning and say, hey, I can't be there, is because they don't know who to talk to if there's an issue. So they always talk to the person that they get the number of. So what you've got to do is you've got a job description for every volunteer. But if you're going to use this approach, you've got to put recruiting somebody else at the top of the job description. So most job descriptions, let's say it's a greeter. It would start like this. It would say greeter, Sunday morning, 11 o'clock, get there at 10:30. You report the head greeter, and it's Billy, and here's his phone number and his email address, and duties of job: show up at 10:30, greet people at the front door. That's a typical job description. How long should this take? It should take about 30 minutes on a Sunday, 0 preparation required, show up and smile, right? And maybe there's a couple other things, but that's typically the job description. And you should absolutely write that down and hand that to that person and say, this is exactly what you're supposed to do. Don't leave it up to, create some clarity. But if you want to excel at this approach, you've got to say, hey, your number one job as a greeter is not to stand at the door and smile and greet people. That's your number 2 job. Your number 1 job is to find somebody who will stand at the door with you. And you make that number 1. And then number 2 is stand at the door and greet. And this is not natural. This is not normal. When they signed up to be a greeter, they signed up because they want to group, not recruit. So you've got to teach people this. And the way you start teaching them this is to put recruiting at the top of the job description. Here, now, let's keep going. Now you can say, hey, this is what we want you to do, but now you've got to equip them for how to do it. So you got to teach people to have what I call an I see in you conversation. An I see in you conversation. This works like this. Let's take that same greeter as an example. So you got to teach this greeter to do this. And you got to teach that greeter to say, listen, as you're greeting people at the door, be on the lookout for people. And then when you say hi to somebody 3-4 weeks in a row, and you notice they always say hi back and handshake, and they smile, and they look nice, they don't look like Captain Ahab, they look like a nice person. As you see them coming in church, and you notice they come in every week, they're pretty faithful, but they sit down and they're not really doing anything. You got to teach them to look out for those things. And then you got to teach them to go up to them and say, hey, listen, real quick, I've been saying hey to you for a while. You're so friendly. You're so friendly. I love the fact that you say hi back to me. When I say hi, you say hi back. That's so great. And you're seem like a friendly person. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think maybe God has gifted you with friendliness. I mean, I don't know if you've ever thought about it that way before, but I think friendliness is like a key thing for you. And I think God could really use that in the church. And I just wanted to tell you, I just see that in you. And here's the deal. That's it. That's the end of the conversation. So what happens next is that person begins to think, man, maybe God did make me friendly. I've never thought about friendliness as being like a gift. Maybe God does want me to use that in the church, right? Maybe I am supposed to do that in the church. And what happens is when you have these I see in you conversations, what you're doing is you're calling out potential in people. You're saying, hey, I see this in you. I think God may have put this in you. Think about this. And you'll open the door to have a conversation to say, hey, if you're friendly and you think God's made you friendly, would you like to be a greeter? Like, I'm a greeter. Would you like to be a greeter with me? Like, here's what that means. It means literally stand on the other side of this together. And you begin to teach people how to have these conversations. And you've got to model this for people. This will work really well for you too, not just for your greeters. You can begin to recruit leaders and volunteers by having these I see in you conversations. And so even now, as we're thinking through this, I bet God may bring somebody to your mind in the next couple say, you know what? I need to have an I see in you conversation with, and you may write their names down. Literally think of some people. Actually think of a few people you can be on the lookout for. You don't have to have meetings with them. You don't have to say, hey, let's meet for lunch. Literally, you can have these conversations in 30 seconds or 60 seconds on a Sunday in the hallway or in the lobby. So that's teach people to do that. So put it on their job description, then teach them to do it. Here's another thing you got to do. If you want to master the shoulder approach, you got to tell stories about serving all year. You got to tell stories about serving all year, because stories create culture and reinforce values. If you want to create a culture in your church where it's normal to volunteer, you've got to tell stories. You've got to tell stories about people serving all year long. You've got to get a microphone and give it to somebody and let them mumble through it. It's not going to be professional because they're not an anchor on CNN. You got to give them the microphone and just let them answer the question, here's why I serve. You got to get out your iPhone and make a 60-second video of somebody serving, maybe outside the door of a kid's classroom, of just saying, hey, my name's, Jimmy, and every week I serve, and this is one of my favorite things I do. And you got to tell those stories in your service, on your website, in your emails. You got to tell stories about serving. You don't have to make the ask. You don't have to do a hard sell, but you got to tell stories all year long about serving, so you can create a culture where serving is normal, so that when these volunteers who are tapping shoulders and rubbing shoulders and having I see in you conversations, you've created a culture which they can say yes. So this is not instant, but you can this Sunday, you can tell a serving story. This once a month, you can tell a serving story. You can emphasize in your service about somebody that's volunteering, about how they're busy and how they're, they've got a job and they got a lot of responsibilities, but they still serve on Sunday. You got to tell the serving stories. Let's keep going. You got to promote opportunities everywhere. If you want to, create this approach by which people are always jumping in volunteer slots, you've got to promote your opportunities everywhere. So where can you do it? You can do it on your website. You can do it in your handout. You can do it in your lobby. A few weeks ago, I was a guest speaker at a church in Atlanta called Fusion Church. Pastor Tony McCollum is the pastor. And I snapped this picture just with my phone. This is in their lobby. This is just in their lobby. They have just a small lobby. And I mean, it's a nice lobby, but it's nothing fancy. And right on the wall with just letters like taped up on the wall, it says, get involved, volunteer opportunities. And then they've got hooks. They've got 15 little hooks that they just stuck in the wall. And they've got these hooks that you can just go and grab one of these off. And I think yellow is like kids ministry. One color might be groups. One color might be host team or guest services. So they're color coded. But literally, they just say, here's what the job is, parking team. Here's a little description of what the parking team does. And if you want more information, here's an email address. And these are just on the wall, available all the time. And I thought, man, this is a great opportunity of a church just making it real normal to get more information on next steps. And so something like that is not expensive and it's a simple way to promote opportunities all over the place. Now, that's the first approach. That's the first approach, shoulder tapping. It happens all the time. When you're rubbing shoulders with people, you're making your existing volunteers, you're saying, listen, you guys go reproduce. Go out into the church and find other people to do this. And then you train and you create the culture that makes it happen. But there's a second approach. Second approach to getting more volunteers is what I call the stage approach. So you've got shoulders and you've got stage. And I grew up Baptist. You got to make everything start with the same letter. So you got shoulders and got stage. Stage, this is a time of, I want you to think of this method as like a campaign. If you've ever done like a financial campaign or a 40-day campaign or a spiritual growth campaign or some kind of campaign in your church to where you take focused energy, where you get all your communication, all your sermons, they're all about kind of the same thing. And so the benefit of this approach, the benefit of the shoulder approach is it's decentralized. The benefit of the stage approach is that you put it on a calendar and you plan it and you make it part of your rhythm. And so the benefit here is that plans bring peace. Plans bring peace. So I remember being a pastor, senior pastor, I would always have staff come up and they would say, Michael, we need more greeters. Michael, we need more kids workers. We need more student workers. We need more small groups. And it was always my problem, right? I was like, this was, okay, don't have a magic button. I think it's like the president. People think the president has a button that raises up and lowers gas prices. And I'm not trying to get political, but it seems like whatever political party you're all the problems are caused by the president, right? It's like, does the president have a lower gas prices button in his desk? It's like, call the Kremlin, lower gas prices, push the red button. No, but here's the deal. People would come to me and they were like, we need more volunteers like this. Like I could do something about it. Okay. And sometimes you can do something like, can you please preach a really good sermon on volunteers and I'll get about 5 volunteers to sign up. All right, awesome. Can you please announce this? Because it's better if you announce it. Maybe you've heard things like that. Well, the benefit to this approach, to this stage approach, is you put it on the calendar, you schedule it every year or twice a year, and you know that you've got a time coming up where you're going to emphasize volunteerism. You know that you've got a time coming up where you're going to talk about it. You know that you got a date on the calendar where you're going to address the problem. And the first time you do it, it'll work a little bit, but the second time you do it, it'll work better. The third time you do them, and planning brings peace. If you'll create a rhythm about talking about volunteerism from the stage, from the pulpit, from the podium, a little mini campaign about recruiting volunteers once or twice a year, every year, that plan will bring peace. Now, let me give you some tips for how to make this work. If you want some tips for making this approach work, okay? Preach a sermon with a very clear call to action. Preach a sermon with a clear call to action. If you're on our email list, you should have got an email from me yesterday that had an example of a sermon. I go to North Point Community Church in Atlanta, and I sent a link out to a message my pastor preached on volunteering. And I sent the link in it, and I told you to pay special attention to it because it was an excellent sermon. about the need for volunteering, and he ended the sermon with a super clear call to action. He said, now here's what I want you to do. And he did it in great Andy style. He put the points up on the screen. He told everybody exactly what to do, to take out the card. And he told everybody exactly what to do. And it would be worth watching. Now, here's the deal. The secret sauce of is Andy preaches that same sermon and just changes it up a little bit every year. In fact, at my church, they internally call that Strategic Service Sunday. And it's the same message. It's the same point. It's the same thing every year, because they know every year they need new volunteers. Every year the church is bigger and they need more people. And just because the church is bigger doesn't mean they don't have the same problems you do. They actually have big problems because there's more people. And so every year he preaches the same sermon about volunteerism, and he clearly asks people to fill out a card. And based on what you check on that card, there is a process put in place, and it is a system. And the plan brings peace, because every year they know they're going to have that Sunday, and they know they're going to get this many people interested. And they know if this many people are interested, this many people are actually going to get connected. And the system works. They've been doing it for years and years and years. It works. And so it starts with planning, but the public side of it starts with a message. And so preach a really good sermon with a clear call to action. Now, the other thing that you want to do if you take this approach is you want to coordinate the entire church calendar. The entire church calendar needs to go around this. You can't on volunteerism and kick off Vacation Bible School that same Sunday. You got to clear the calendar, and you got to make this the main thing. Kind of like that if you're doing a campaign. If you're doing a 40-day campaign, anybody that coaches you on a 40-day campaign is going to tell you, if you're trying to launch a bunch of other stuff, trying to do some other stuff, it won't. You're trying to do a financial campaign, you can't be doing a bunch of other stuff. You got to focus on the finances. Same is true with volunteerism. If you're going to take a Sunday or 2 Sundays and emphasize volunteerism, you've got to clear the calendar, and you can't be doing other stuff. You got to focus it. And that's why planning brings peace. Put it on the calendar, keep other stuff away from it. Now, the other thing is you got to prepare first steps and follow up. So when Andy preaches that message on volunteerism, he asks everybody to take out the card and turn in the card on their way out. And there's about 3 or 4 boxes you can check on the card. I'm interested in helping with preschool services. That's it. Simple. And he says, you're not signing up today. You're signing up to say, I want more information. And you turn the card in. Now, here's what happens behind the scenes. Behind the scenes, the church is ready for all the cards to be turned in. And depending on what box you check, you're going to get follow-up that's already, if you said, I'm interested in working with kids, you're going to get invited to a meeting. And the meeting is going to be, in 2 weeks from now, and they're going to, they've got a process ready to go. If you're interested in being a greeter, your meeting is going to happen next week right after the service for 15 minutes. The bar's a little lower. But the point is that they planned it out, and they planned it out, and the follow-up and the first steps are ready. And so if you're going to ask a bunch of people to say, hey, sir, serve, we want you to serve, we want you to serve, turn in the card, you got to chart that process out. In fact, we created a process and we've written it out for you. And I'd love to share that with you. I'll tell you how you can get that process. Pay attention. So you got to prepare the steps, and you got to follow up. You got to execute that whole campaign right there. Now, I want to give you a couple warnings about choosing an approach, okay? I love warnings. I love this sign right here. This is my favorite warning sign. It says, caution, protruding sign. I'm like, I don't understand that sign. That's my favorite sign. I don't know why I think that's so funny. But I want to give you a warning. When we're talking about the stage approach, okay? Here's a warning. You cannot recruit leaders from the stage. You can recruit volunteers from the stage, but you cannot recruit leaders from the stage. And those are 2 different things. Now, we've got a whole training and a whole teaching on how you can turn volunteers into leaders, like what's the difference and how you can move volunteers into leaders, but they are dramatically different. Leaders are not going to sign up at a sign-up table. Volunteers will sign up at a sign-up table. The process for recruiting leaders is completely different than the process for recruiting volunteers. So when I talk about preaching on volunteerism and having the sign-up card up, putting it on the calendar and creating a little mini campaign, I'm talking about recruiting volunteers. I am not talking about recruiting leaders. That's why that stage process is not going to work for recruiting small group leaders. That process is different. And we can talk about that. We have great training on how to do that. But you cannot recruit leaders from the stage. You can recruit volunteers from the stage. I want to give you another warning. I'm going to give you a second warning. Here's another warning sign. This is a sign. Do not breathe. Good tip. But here's my tip. My tip for you is this. Don't until you master one. So I just talked about two approaches to recruiting volunteers. Talked about the shoulder approach and talked about the stage approach. And here's what I know you're thinking right now. It's like, all right, man, we need so many volunteers. We're going to do both of these. And I want to caution you. Do not try to do both of them until you master one. Okay? You're going to end up doing the first one halfway and the second one halfway, and the results are not half the results. The results are quarter the results. Okay? Get really good at one approach. Make one approach the way you do it. And so let's say you choose the stage approach. When you get really good at the stage approach, meaning you've done it 3, 4, 5 times and it's systematic and it's like clockwork, then you can introduce shoulders. Okay, or you go, hey, our church isn't really built from the stage out. You know, we're going to go the shoulder approach. We're going to commit to the shoulder approach for like a year or for 2 years, and really get good at that approach before you try to bring in the other approach. So don't mix them until you master one. All right. So that was number one. The first thing we said was you got to choose an approach to recruiting. The second thing you've got to do is you've got to lower your standards. Lower your standards. Now this sounds counterintuitive. So lower your standards. That doesn't sound right. Yes, lower your standards. Here's the principle. The harder you make something, the fewer people will do it. Right? This isn't just true in church. This is true of just anything. The harder you make something, the fewer complexity and difficulty filters people out. So the harder you make something, the fewer people are going to do it. That's why, I mean, I teach this to my kids. I'm like, that when they want to do something, great. I'm like, if you want to do something great, you have to work hard, because if it was easy, everybody would do it, right? So the opposite of that is if it's hard, few people are going to do it. So what do I mean by that? You've got to make it easy to serve in your church. Now, not in all areas. Some places it needs to be a little harder to serve. Okay, so the requirements for working with kids might be different from the requirements from like operating a video camera, for example. Okay, so if you're going to recruit a bunch of volunteers, you've got to, at least in some areas, make it really, really easy to serve. You've got to remove the barriers. You get to remove the barriers. And so let me give you a couple of the barriers. The first barrier I see in churches is the faith barrier. The faith barrier. Now, I know the Bible has a lot to say about Christian maturity, about being a pastor, being an elder, being a deacon. The Bible has a lot to say about that. There's some guidelines. There's some qualifications for leaders and leadership in church. And I don't want to get into all the theology of that, but this is a great conversation. I love those conversations. But for the sake of our training today, we're just going to agree that there are some qualifications for leadership in the Bible. But I'm not entirely sure that the biblical qualifications for elders in your church apply to being a greeter at the front door, right? Okay, I think we can agree on that. That there are some qualifications for being an elder or deacon or pastor or leader in a church, but I'm not sure that those qualifications apply to being a greeter. Common sense would tell us this, that the requirements to be a small group leader in your church might be different than the requirements to be like an usher, okay? To be an usher, okay? So there's a faith barrier that sometimes we create where we try to expect people to be super Christians before they can serve in what I would consider entry-level positions. Now remember, we said this at the beginning of our training, that serving is a part of the discipleship process. Some people grow in their faith. In fact, a lot of people, and I would even argue that serving may even be a more important part of the discipleship process. But serving is a part of the discipleship process. So if you set the bar so high to you got to be a super Christian before you can serve, you are robbing people from the opportunity to grow their faith. Serving is a catalyst for growing people's faith. So you got to create some places where people can serve in your church, where they don't have to know the Apostles' Creed, where they don't have to go through the membership class, where they don't have to go through 13 steps and sign a covenant to serve. You need to create some places where people can serve in entry-level positions. And so if you're waiting until people get it all together before asking them to serve, you're going to be waiting a really long time, because here's what we know. Most people in church don't have it all together. This past week, I was up at Crosspoint Church in Nashville, Tennessee, and they have done such a great job. I think everyone should learn from them. They have done such a great job of creating a culture where everyone is welcome. And they say it. Nobody's perfect. Everyone's welcome. And they've created a great environment, a great culture where you can come in and where you can belong to a church before you believe all the same exact things. And I think they've done a great job of knocking down the faith barrier to serving. And so, where in your church can you serve as an entry level? Where in your church can you serve if you're just seeking, if you've got questions, if you've got doubts? Are there places in your church where you can serve before even that you don't even have to be a Christian to serve in? And I would challenge you to think through some of those places. Here's another barrier. Another barrier that I see is the age barrier. The age barrier. Some of your best volunteers are under the age of 18. A church hired me not too long ago to come in and help them, and they needed volunteers on Sunday. And they didn't like my answer. I told them to cancel their youth Sunday school class because all the I said, good news. You've got about 20 or 30 volunteers you can serve in your preschool ministry and your elementary ministry and be greeters and be on the parking team. I have solved your volunteer problem. All of your volunteers that can serve right now are in this high school class, and they're all hanging out with each other, and they could do that later or some other time. You could unleash them on serving opportunities. It would actually be better for their faith. There's your volunteers. Good news. I've just solved the problem instantaneously. I didn't quite say it like that. I exaggerated a little bit. But that particular church had some years, but they were putting them off in this room over there. Some of the best volunteers in your church are under the age of 18. Now, one of the reasons we go and attend North Point is I love Andy's teaching, but I don't even think that's the best part of North Point. And I love Andy and Andy's teaching, but I think the best part of North Point is their kids and student ministries. And my 9-year-old, his small group leader is a high school guy, and he loves his high school he loves his small group leader. He tells me every week what his high school small group leader told him. And I love the fact that my 10-year-old looks up to a high school student who is following Jesus and trying to follow Jesus and leading and investing in my 10-year-old, in my 9-year-old. I have a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old. And both of them have leaders who are in high school. And so some of your best volunteers in your church are under the age of 18. So find a place for them to serve. There's all kinds of places they can serve in your church. I'm not sure gathering them all together, it might appeal best for their faith. And so that's a tension, I know, and my job is just to create tension for you today and then move along. All right, so that's number 2, was lower your standards. So the 3 keys to recruiting volunteers is number 1, choose an approach. Number 2, lower your standards. And then number 3 is create opportunity. Create opportunity. Now, one thing I want you to do, I want you to answer this question. You can type it in the chat if you're participating live. If you're watching later, on the replay, just write it down somewhere. I want you to be able to answer this question because I ask it to people all the time. And the question is this: how many volunteers do you need? Because you came to a training today called How to Get More Volunteers. And my question to you is, how many more volunteers do you need? Now, I've asked that question over and over and over again, and very few people can tell me the answer to it. You know what they tell me? They tell me they just need more. They just need more. When I ask the question, how many volunteers do you need? They tell me, I want more. I just want more volunteers. How many volunteers? I just need more. It's like, how much money do you need? I don't know. I just need more. No. The key to recruiting volunteers, the key to creating opportunity is to have a specific answer to how many volunteers you need. How many volunteers you need? You need to answer the question. More is not the right answer. If you're setting out to raise money for a capital campaign and the bank comes along and says, how much money do you need? You can't answer that question with more. They want to know a specific dollar amount. More is not a good answer. So how many volunteers do you need? Now, maybe you need 10, maybe you need 15, maybe you need 20. You're going to have to get some people together. You're going to have to think through all your church and come up with an actual number of how many volunteers you need. For some of you, just getting that number, just getting clarity around how many more volunteers you need. What opportunities are not filled right now? How many more volunteers do we need? That would be great clarity for you. Because once you answer this question, how many volunteers you need, you can go get them. Then you can go fill them. You can choose an approach. You can go get them. But you got to answer this question. Now, let me give you some tips for creating opportunity. I want to encourage you to create some brand new specific opportunities. Let me unpack this because it's important. Most churches always need kids ministry workers. The problem with saying we need kids ministry workers is after you've said it about 50 times, people tune it out, right? Do you know what people pay attention to? They pay attention to what's new. This is why when you go to the grocery store, you're like, oh, they got a new cereal. They got a new cereal. It says new. And it's all marshmallows. It's Lucky Charms. Oops, all marshmallows, right? Let's buy that. And they put brand new on the front. New stands out. So what do people notice? They notice new. And so I want to encourage you to create some brand new opportunities. And when you create new opportunities, they need to be specific. Now, you can create new opportunities out of old by just changing the language or tweaking it up a little bit. And I want to show you exactly what I mean. And I'm telling you, if you'll apply this principle, this will really work. You can recruit some new volunteers this week if you'll do this. Okay. So let me give you some examples. All right. So instead of saying we need children's ministry workers, right? You've been saying that for 5 years. Okay. As a pastor, I said that for years. I said it every Sunday. Instead of saying we need children's ministry workers, what if you said it like this? We need an assistant teacher to help with 4th and 5th graders at 11 o'clock. Now, that is specific. And we need children's ministry workers is so generic, it just goes over the head of everybody else. When you say, okay, we need an assistant teacher. Okay, that's an important word, assistant. It means I'm not the only one. With 4th and 5th graders, okay, whew, good, because kids ministry worker, I was thinking preschool, 4th and 5th graders, I can handle them because they can speak in sentences, okay, at 11 o'clock. Okay, I can do that at 11 o'clock because, it's when I come to church anyway. See how that's specific? That specific sentence, we need an assistant teacher to help with 4th and 5th graders at 11 o'clock, has a better chance of lodging in somebody's mind than we need children's ministry workers. Let me give you another example. We need greeters. We need some greeters. We want to be friendly. We want to welcome people. We want to create a friendly environment, so we need greeters. Okay? You can do better. You can do better. What if you said it like this? We're looking for a friendly to stand at the front door from 10:30 to 11 every other week. Now, nobody's going to sign up if you just say we need greeters. I mean, that's not going to lodge its way into the psyche of people. But when you use this other sentence, it's like, oh, I can do this with my spouse. Oh, it's standing at the door. Oh, it's for 30 minutes and it's every other week. Now I'm paying attention because it's specific. How about this one? Work with teenagers. It's really important. I mean, they're the future. It's so important. I mean, people come to know Jesus before they're 18. Here's the statistic, and it's really important. It's really important. All right, yeah, I get it. Everything's important. What if you said it like this? We need a burly with tattoos to handle security on Wednesday nights, because that's when their student ministry meets. Now, all of a sudden, you've created a super specific volunteer opportunity for a guy. Even if he doesn't have tattoos, he's like, hey, I could do that. You're telling me I can be like a bouncer? Yeah, that's way different than work with teenagers, because work with teenagers sounds scary. Big guy with tattoos to just be around on Wednesday night, I can do that. Now, here's what we know. These two columns are almost the same things, but you're just saying it in a clearer way, and you're lodging in the hearts and mind of people, and you're creating opportunities for people to serve. Here's another tip. Don't just create specific opportunities. Create places for people to serve with their minds. In other words, if all the volunteer positions at your church require physical work, you're going to miss out on a bunch of people who God has gifted in an amazing way to be able to serve with their mind, with creativity, or with business sense, or with leadership, or with communication. You need to create, as you're creating opportunity in your church, don't just make all the opportunities where you have to show up at 11 and do something, or come to the workday and move something. It's not about just moving stuff around. It's not about just being physically present. Create places for people to serve with their minds. And this is going to open up about 50% of the people in your church who don't want to do physical stuff, or they're not really called to do physical stuff, or they can't serve at 11 o'clock on Sunday, but they can serve with their mind the way God's gifted them. So let me give you some examples. Social media. That's a mental thing. That's something they make. That's a mental thing. They can learn that. Find pictures and quotes and post stuff on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. Social media can be run completely in your church by volunteers. We have a whole course on this. Social media is an amazing place for people to serve with their mind. How about proofreader? I need to hire a proofreader, because I am an okay writer and I am an awful editor. I type too fast, and I miss mistakes all the time. And you've all had the bulletin error, right? The bulletin error, you've seen funny bulletin errors. Those are funny. Somebody can proofread your bulletin, or proofread your message, or proofread your blog post, or proofread a letter, or whatever. And they can do that on Tuesday night from their house. They don't have to come up to the church on Sunday. There are some people that they're grammar police people in your church. When they point out a typo, say good news. You caught our test. We put that in. You caught the test. You passed the test. Can I send you our bulletin next Thursday before we print it on Friday? Will you read over it? Boom. You've just recruited a volunteer. How about sermon feedback? Do you have like wannabe theologians in your church who like to fact check messages? Don't view them as a negative. I used to do that. I used to get so irritated with those people until I realized that's how God wired them. Why can't you send them and say, hey, here's what I'm about to preach in 3 days. You see anything I can improve? That is a tremendous, that is a information. How about a report maker? You need somebody to make reports, like financial reports or attendance reports or evaluation reports. There are people in that stuff. You may hate it, but there are people who love it. How about content storage? Like here's what I mean by content storage. Like, could you send your sermon on Monday to somebody and go, hey, here's the sermon I just preached. Could you turn it into a transcript? Could you post it on Facebook? Could you get some quotes out of it and splice it up and send it out throughout the week? Could you make a blog post out of it? Could you add some search engine terms to it? Again, you can get a lot of mileage out of some people involved with their brains. How about event planning? You know, your church there's somebody in your church who's great with events, and they just don't think of themselves as like kids ministry volunteer or student ministry or small group leader. But you know what they're good at? They're good at planning events. They're good at making people feel welcome, and it'll really help. And so that is a huge thing. So here's an action step for you. Make a list of 10 brand new specific opportunities in your church. I mean, make that list. You can do that today. As soon as we get off this thing in a few minutes. And I got some stuff I want to give you, so hang with me for a few more minutes. But when you're done, make a list of 10 new opportunities for people to serve. And make specific and make half of them places people can serve with their mind. Now, recruiting volunteers is just one part of the volunteer system. I showed you this at the beginning. We said recruit, train, and pastor. And today, we've been talking about ways that you can recruit more volunteers. But you and I, we all know recruiting them is just the first part. Once you get them in, you got to train them, you got to equip them, you got to pastor them, you got to lead them. And there's other parts of this system that we didn't talk about today. But I would love to give you that training. I'd like to help you train volunteers, and I'd like to help you pastor volunteers. In fact, this is even just volunteering. Back out a little more. So we talked about one part of volunteering, but we said it's a little bigger than that. But even just the area of volunteers, you can back out from that, and you can get even bigger than that. And volunteerism is just one of the healthy systems that you need in your church. So there's all kinds of systems that you need: guest service systems and service planning systems and leadership systems and staff systems. And so put together, I get this question all the time: how do we create all these healthy systems? Volunteerism is great. You helped me today, but we need more help. We need help in these areas. How do we create them? So we created a course called the Systems Course. And at the end, so I want to talk about this for just a few minutes, and I want to give you an offer to get this at a discount and also get a bonus that is a really, really, really cool bonus. But we created the Systems Course because people were asking us, we need help with these systems. We realized that volunteerism is a system. Guest follow-up is a system, and we need some help with them. And so we created the Systems Course for you. And so I'd love to invite you to join. Here's what I think will happen if you join. 3 benefits of the System Course. First of all, you're going to have a guide. You're going to have a guide. I have, throughout the last 5 or 6 years, I have hired and paid for counselors and coaches and conferences and networks and relationships and all kinds of stuff. And every time I've done that, I've learned something that has helped me take a huge step forward in either life or business. Having a guide is so huge. It's so huge. And the Systems Course can be like a guide for you. I would love to be your guide. I worked with Stephen out in Oklahoma, and Stephen said this. He said, there's no way to overstate the impact Michael's coaching's had on my ability to coach and develop my staff. His systems helped me make it so simple. I'm grateful for Stephen, and I'm thankful that he said that and he shared that. Sean is a pastor in South Carolina, and he tweeted this. And I didn't ask him to tweet this. He just tweeted this. We've had Michael working into Freedom Church of Moncks Corner into our systems for 2 years, and you need to do this. And he put a link to your systems, which is the Systems Course. And he's just saying, hey, this has helped us. This has helped us. And Sean's church has grown. I mean, they've like doubled in size over the last year. It's been crazy. And so I think it'd be great if you had a guide, and I'd be honored. I really would be honored to be your guide. The second thing you get in this course is you're going to get a template. Now, I don't mean just a physical template, although we're going to give you templates. Literally, the course has all kinds of documents and spreadsheets and resources. But you're also going to get, when I say template, I mean like, here's the systems that you should work on. Here's the order that you should work on them in. Here's a step-by-step plan for implementing this in your church. And so you're going to get a template. But I think the biggest benefit by far is you're going to get it done. If you've been saying to yourself, man, we really need to work on some of our systems for a while, you're going to keep saying that until you do something different that allows you to get it done. And I think this could be it for you. If you jump in, here's what you're going to get. Okay, here's what you get when you join. First of all, you get monthly training. And so every month we do a training like this, but even more specific and more in depth with real examples and lots of screenshots and lots of video, monthly training. And so you can watch it. You can watch it with your staff. Somebody sent me a tweet the other day. They showed a picture of their auditorium, and they had the training up on the big screens, and their whole church was watching it. I mean, their whole church was just watching the training. It was so cool to see that. The topics that we cover in these monthly trainings, here's some of them. Connecting new people to your church. Moving people into groups is a huge question we get. How do we get people in groups? We did a whole training on it. It's like today, but even more in depth. How do we train our volunteers? We talked about recruiting. I'm going to show you how to train them without having meetings that waste everybody's time. How do we get organized? How do I get organized and lead myself? Because I could be the problem. What about stewardship and generosity? What about how do I develop and lead a staff? We're part-time, no time, get all these people. How do we develop them and lead them? How do we turn volunteers into leaders? How do we reach new people, brand new people like guests? How do we plan great services that engage the heart and honor God? How do we create a calendar? Those are just some of the training topics. There's 12 in all. 12 training topics, and you're going to get one every month, and you can participate in those training topics. Now, here's the other thing you get. This is what makes this tangible, is we're going to give you not just training, but we're going to give you insanely practical resources. And so we're going to give you Word documents and spreadsheets and flowcharts. When we talk about create a guest follow-up process, I've actually made the flowchart and written it all down for you, and I've give it to you so you can download it and just tweak it up and use it. We're going to give you letters. We're going to give you all kinds of documents. There's dozens and dozens of resources that are going to save you time and implement them. And we give you the original files so you can just change them. They're not samples and examples. They're the original files so you can change them up. So how much does it cost? Let me compare it to a couple of things first. Y'all know Dave Ramsey. Dave Ramsey has an awesome membership program, EntreLeadership membership program. It is so good, very, very good quality, and it'll help you be a better leader. It costs $3,600 a year. It's $299 a month. It's pretty expensive. It's worth it. It's pretty expensive. Catalyst. I go to Catalyst conference every year. Love it. It's one of my favorite conferences. It's happening in Atlanta, and I love it. And I go every year, and I buy a ticket. It's awesome. It's great. If you get in on the early bird offer, it costs $239, and then you got to travel, and that's for one person. How much does the systems course cost? We've tried to price it so that every church can participate, and it's just $397 for the whole course.